Oh, howdy all, grab yourself a drink. It is time for some Path of Exile 2 discussion. Welcome to day 10 of teaser season. Patch 0.2.0 Dawn of the Hunt is just a couple of days away, and the bad news first, we still don't have patch notes. Patch notes Granny Games are still working on. They're hoping to have them out tomorrow. Now, as I'm saying, this is Wednesday in New Zealand time after close of business, so they're hoping to have them out Thursday, but that is still not something that they've absolutely committed to and promised, so probably Thursday, maybe even Friday. My personal plans, when the patch notes come out, I want to do a deep dive on this channel. That'll be in the form of a live stream. I also want to have a bit of a review of them first. Whether that live stream happens on Thursday my time or Friday my time is still up in the air. That's going to depend on exactly when it gets announced. Anyway, let's go through the news that we actually do have today. This is the Dawn of the Hunt item filter information. This is one of those posts Granny Games put out every league, and they never really explain what it actually means. So let's start out with a super simplified version of what this is. This is information that is designed to people who do a lot of work in building complex loot filters. So we're not talking about people who just make minor tweaks to an established one, but if you're someone like Neversink, who runs the website Filterblade, which is the most commonly used tool for designing item filters, or if you're one of the people around the Path of Exile 2 racing scene who design racing optimized filters, this information is stuff you need to really pore over. For everyone else, this is just simply two things. Firstly, it's a notice to you. Your old loot filters have expired. You will need to generate a new one. You want to do this every league start anyway because there's going to be a new economy. People are going to be hyped for spears. People are going to be less hyped for certain things. Like if Archmage gets completely gutted in the patch notes, then there's going to be a lot less interest in high item level lightning ones, for instance. There's going to be a whole lot of differences in what players want on their items. And as a result, loot filters are going to have to evolve. And that's going to be something where you'll do it well enough on day one, but then I urge you to reassess your loot filter, whether it's still meeting your needs 3 or 4 days into the league. And then again, probably on day 10 or so. So first and foremost, this is a reminder, change your league, change your item filter. And the game will simply not let you use a 0.1.0 item filter because there'll be a whole lot of items, such as the hunting spear, that will simply not be in it. And the game has a number of checks and balances to make sure that you're not using a loot filter that's too old to be useful. On top of that though, the other thing that's contained in this item filter information is some information on new items that are being added to the game, and also items that have changed in various ways. Not every change is captured here. For instance, no changes to item statistics are captured here, but there'll be a huge section on items that have been renamed. So let's go through exactly what's contained here. Firstly, new items, item class spears. Well, they're adding the Huntress. They're going to have to add a whole bunch of itemization support. These are all of the different bases that'll exist for spears. We don't have any stats on these yet. Hopefully we'll have those about 14 hours before league start, once data mining into the torrent file has been able to take place. Likewise, we have the item class bucklers. Again, the same thing applies. It's worth noting that Granny Games normally have it in such a way that the ones that are towards the bottom of this list have the highest attribute requirements, the highest level requirements, and generally speaking, the highest performance. But sometimes you're going to want something specific for your character as well. Ultimately, most players are probably going to end up using one of the bottom 5 on each of these lists at endgame, unless they happen to get something that is phenomenally well rolled on one of the other bases. There is also a new wand. Now, the Acrid Wand is something that has been data mined. This is something that can't drop in 0.1.0, but that is believed to exist in the game files. And it has the skill Decompose and a level requirement of 33. Of course, whether that is actually the way that it is implemented in 0.2.0 is anyone's guess. After this, we have the item classes, rings and amulets. These are 4 new bases for each of these, and they seem to be very closely tied to Path of Exile 1's 3.19 Kalandra mechanics. Not necessarily all of the mechanics of exactly how that league worked, but there was a special area in it called the Lake of Kalandra, and when you completed that, you could be awarded one of these rings. It was only the rings in Path of Exile 1, there weren't the amulets. The Dusk Ring, Gloam Ring, Penumbra Ring, and Tenebrous Ring in that game had differing effects whether you put them on your left ring slot or your right ring slot. That may well not be the case here. What we do know about the amulets specifically, the amulets did get teased. At least one of them got teased in the live stream that Granny Games ran a few days ago, and it had space for the standard 6 affixes that a rare item can have as a maximum, but instead of being 3 prefixes, 3 suffixes, I can't remember which it was either 2 prefixes, 4 suffixes, or 4 prefixes, 2 suffixes. And so I speculate that that's probably going to be the same for all of these. So there'll be a 1 prefix 5 suffix, a 2 prefix 4 suffix, a 4 prefix 2 suffix, and a 5 prefix 1 suffix version of each of these, but the exact details are something we'll know for certain once the game's been live for a little while. In the item class stackable currency, there's nothing new here, but Fracturing Orbs, just a little bit of a reminder, these are joining us from Path of Exile 1 to Path of Exile 2, and they're going to do the same thing they do in Path of Exile 1, but because of the way that the games are different, the way that rolling items is different in particular in Path of Exile 2, the Fracturing Orb is going to have different strengths and different weaknesses. I also believe it's going to be more common than it was in Path of Exile 1, but that's based upon information from a teaser video that might not be 100% up to date. After that, in the item class Socketable, we have all of the new runes that are being added. Lesser and greater versions of a bunch of existing runes and a few new ones. And on top of that, we have Talismans. Talismans are going to come from new content. And these Talismans are going to be like a rune or a soul core, but they're going to be more restrictive in where you can place them. For example, one of them was teased to only work if it's placed in body armor. Whereas the other runes, they can be placed into martial weapons, they can be placed into armor. These Talismans are going to be much more restrictive than that. So the next category here are the Reliquary keys. These are something that you want your loot filter to absolutely scream at you when they drop. So set them to start out at the same level of screaming that your loot filter makes for a perfect Jeweler's Orb. You can adjust them over time if that turns out not to be correct. Now, the Twilight Reliquary key is going to provide a random unique item. And this is editing GOG because I always forget something in a video like this. These unique items that are sourced from these Reliquary keys, they're going to look graphically distinct, they'll have a foiling effect. Those of you that might have played Magic the Gathering over the years, I think something like back in 1999 they introduced foil cards into that game. Same mechanical effect, but just a slightly glossier appearance. And that's exactly what these Reliquary key sourced uniques will be. If you get an Astromantis that comes out of one of these, it's going to look distinctly different to an Astromantis that drops from a regular monster. But it's not random across every unique item that exists in the game. Instead, it will be a selection that's been curated by those players who have purchased the top tier supporter pack. Additionally, individual unique items that are extremely rare, like Astromantis, 1 vote for Astromantis doesn't increase the chance of Astromantis dropping all that much. It does always increase it, but it doesn't increase it by a lot. Whereas 1 vote for a very common unique like Lifesprig is going to have a big impact. Additionally, the rarer that the average item that's pulled out of the Reliquary key is, the rarer the Reliquary key itself is. So that's the Twilight Reliquary key. What about all these other ones that are tied to bosses? Either Pinnacle bosses, or in the case of Zarok and the Trial Master's keys, tied to bosses of Ascendancy trials. This is something Grinding Gear Games decided to do after seeing the way that the Voidborn Reliquary key developed in Path of Exile 1. This is something that they did 2 years ago, and it's very similar to the Twilight Reliquary key in theme. However, it was allowed to include most boss uniques. They made one exception for Original Sin, which is an item that is reasonably similar to Temporalis in Path of Exile 2, in the way that it's acquired. So in Path of Exile 1, you could have something that was an Uber Pinnacle drop like the unique ring Nimbus, and it could come out of a Voidborn Reliquary key. Grinding Gear Games didn't want this. They wanted boss loot to only come from the boss, and so in Path of Exile 2, if you were going to get, say, a foil Hand of Wisdom in action, it's only going to come from a Zesh Reliquary key. The only source for a Zesh Reliquary key is from slaying Zesh, and you'll have a better chance of dropping it if you're doing Zesh to difficulty 4. However, there will still be a very slim chance of getting it if you kill Zesh at level 0, 1, 2, or 3. So that's the Vault Keys. If you loot one of these, consider selling it to other players unless you're definitely willing to take the risk, because most of the time that you open one of these, you'll end up getting something that's worth far less than the key is. These keys tend to settle around about in line with community perceptions of the percentage chance of getting one of the most valuable items that come from it. For example, in Path of Exile 1, the Voidborn Reliquary key tends to sell for about 1 1/3% the price of a Mage Blood. This is because there seems to be a fairly widespread community opinion. People differ on this, but a lot of people believe it's about 1 in 75 to get the unique item Mage Blood from the Voidborn Reliquary key. All these people could well be wrong. It could actually be 1 in 60, it could actually be 1 in 120, we don't know, but a lot of people believe that, and as a result, every time the price gets wildly off that 1 to 75 ratio, people either start buying more or selling more of them until it gets back into equilibrium. I think we're going to see something similar here, where the chance of getting an Astromantis, or if Dream Fragments is still super chase in this league, then Dream Fragments as well, the chance of getting these is probably going to drive the price of these Reliquary keys in trades with other players. After that, we have the Omens. 4 new Omens. I don't think we know anything about these Omens yet, so that'll be interesting, something that will change the way crafting works in some subtle way, but how exactly, we're just going to have to find that out. Omen of Answered Prayers, Secret Compartments, The Hunt, and Reinforcements. After that, GGG Games have done a lot of work on improving item bases. This is not changes to item bases in terms of their gameplay effect. This is simply changes in terms of their name, but also their artwork. A lot of the item bases have themes that are tied to Act 4, 5, and 6. Those ones were not in the game for 0.1.0. However, they're now all done, and GGG Games have decided they're going to release them all rather than waiting until the relevant acts come out. So, this means that a whole bunch of existing names of items are getting changed. This is actually the single biggest factor in why you can't use old loot filters anymore, because they're going to refer to things like Advanced Crumbling Maul that no longer exist because they've now been replaced to Disintegrating Maul. This is a whole list of things here. The most important thing really to pay attention to, in the past you could identify a high level base because it had the word expert in it. However, now what you're going to need to look for is instead a high minimum level, or alternately high stat requirements in order to equip it. So that's all of the new bases, and that's the end of what's in this early access announcements item filters page. On top of that, there was one more piece of significant news today, and that was there was a significant interview that was done over on Darth Microtransactions and Gazzy TV's podcast with Jonathan from GGG Games. There were a lot of questions that were asked in this, and I'm only going to summarize a few of these. I will put a link down in the description below if you want to watch the whole thing. Some of the things that they were talking about. They currently feel that block is in a solid place against bosses, but that it's weak when you're clearing, and as a result, players don't really get much experience using it, and as a result, they don't generally have the play skill when they're going up against a boss, the intuition of using block all the time. This is something that they took into mind when they were designing the parry mechanic, and as a result, they've designed the parry mechanic in such a way that it will be useful while you're mapping. The second thing, Magic Find is being nerfed in complicated ways. They didn't really go into all that much detail on how, but it looks like they're escalating the amount of diminishing returns that applies to Magic Find. They're going to remove some of the most extreme outliers, the items that gave an enormous amount of Magic Find at low opportunity cost. And additionally, they considered removing Magic Find scaling on currency entirely and found it didn't work, so instead they pulled back the effectiveness. They're not happy overall with the situation, which is honestly something I'm quite happy to see, because Magic Find was probably my pick of the single worst mechanic in 0.1.0. I think though that with the changes that they've outlined, the first 2 pieces of Magic Find gear that you get are still going to be absolutely mandatory. After that, we've got to test it, whether the third one is worth using or not. But even in the early campaign, I think you definitely want to pick up Magic Find if you can. It is really, really strong even in the campaign. It will speed up your progression substantially because you'll then be in a situation where more rare items are dropping. And also, you'll simply have more Exalted Orbs to throw onto the rare items that you get that were already good enough to use, just to make them slightly better than they otherwise were. So, Magic Find, still going to be OP during the campaign. Probably not going to be as ridiculous deep into endgame. Editing GOG here again. I always call the Trials of the Sekma and the Trials of Chaos by the equivalent mechanics names in Path of Exile 1. So whenever I say Sanctum, I mean Trials of the Sekma. Whenever I say Ultimatum, I mean Trials of Chaos. Sorry about that. The second thing that came out was that the Sanctum was tuned harder than they'd intended. So they're going to be nerfing Zarok a bit, and they're also going to be making some other changes. His hit points are double what they'd intended, and they're just not generally happy with the Hourglass gimmick in the fight. Additionally, one of the Ultimatum mini-bosses is a filler. It's something that's not finished. They weren't happy with the boss that they were intending to put into that Ascendancy trial, so they put in something else instead. They're not happy with that situation. We will see tomorrow in the patch notes whether there's going to be any further changes there. For Pinnacle bosses, they have made one really important change that hasn't been talked about enough. Previously, their philosophy had been, if you want to do a Breach Stone, you need to do 60 maps with Breach encounters in them. They're halving this for all of the encounters, so you can expect to fight Zesht once per 30 maps that have breaches. Likewise, the same will be true of all of the other mechanics. So King in the Mist access tokens, doubling of the drop rate. Olroth fights, doubling the drop rate, and that may be doubling the drop rate of logbooks, or it may be doubling the chance of having Olroth within a logbook, or it might be a little from column A, a little from column B. So You know, it might be 60% more logbooks, 25% more chance to get Olroth inside them. We don't know the exact details there. But that's the overarching philosophy that they've got there. On map objectives, currently the objective in most maps is to kill all the rare monsters, and a lot of people find this gets a little bit monotonous. They were asked if they'd considered alternatives, and they experimented with some internally and found that all of the alternatives that they tried got old quickly. The one change that they've made, though, that is substantial, if a map has a boss in it, then that boss is going to be the sole objective. That said, you're probably also going to want to kill all the rare monsters because the last rare monster is going to get a bonus chance to have a map drop, and that map drop chance is going to be substantial. What about the Rogue Exiles? They're going to appear from Act 4 in about 8% of zones, and this 8% number is subject to change. There'll be hard fights to beat, but they will scale with level, so it's not like you're going to encounter one that's tuned for deep into endgame when you're just in Act 5. Instead, you'll get one that is an Act 5 level encounter, but it will be at the harder end of Act 5 encounters. Additionally, these Rogue Exiles are going to respect the level requirements of the gear that they equip. So, if an item has a minimum drop level of 67, then a Rogue Exile that is in a level 66 zone will not be allowed to equip that item. Instead, it will have something else. There are a number of questions that came up around on-death effects with monsters, and Groningen Games' philosophy here, they are working to remove the ones that feel egregiously unfair. They don't want a situation where loot and death effects overlap with each other, but they're also generally fine with ones that don't feel egregiously unfair. There are a number of questions related to critical strikes, and one thing that's really important here, the Amazon Ascendancy had a node that was unclear in its wording. My video on it, I mentioned that there were 3 possible ways it could be interpreted, and Jonathan said he believes it is the most favorable of the 3. So he believes the Amazon node that has the extremely descriptive name Critical Strike, that it is actually going to add base critical strike chance to the weapon. Editing Gog here. I just want to clarify that people have been saying this is better than it actually is. They've been saying this is a guaranteed 12.5% base critical strike chance. No, it is not. You do not even get 12% if you have 100,000 accuracy, and you cannot get 100,000 accuracy even with meme level investment. Even if you are inflicting blind on your enemy, you should be expecting this to be more like 8% critical strike, which is actually pretty good. It's better than I'd originally thought because now we've got that confirmation that it works in the most favorable way, but it's not something that I would say is absolutely god tier. If you're not inflicting blind, it's probably more like 6.5 to 7% base crit. Again, pretty good, but not ridiculous. And it is also affected quite a bit when a monster happens to have the evasive mod, which will come up moderately often. But a question was asked, are they going to be sweeping across the board nerfs to critical strike balance? And the answer was no, they're not planning on doing that in 020. They were looking for more extreme outliers than crit. And the way that I interpreted this is going to be the unholy trinity that dominated 0.1.0 balance, Hand of Wisdom in action, Archmage, and Trample Toe. The 3 of these made up 89% of the high-level meta, and as a result, expecting to see significant nerfs to all of them. The final question that came up that caught my attention was one about, will we gain the ability to de-level skill gems? And they're not happy with the fact that players want to do this. So they don't want a situation where players are thinking, oh, I really want to use a level 8 or 9 version of this gem at endgame. They want you to instead desire a level 18, 19, or 21. And to this effect, they have done some changes to the ways that attack builds scale their mana cost. Mana cost on attacks is no longer going to be as heavily influenced by sources of plus X to gem levels. It will still scale a little bit with that, but it's not going to be as explosive as it was in 010. And I guess the final point is that there are going to be substantial nerfs to mana and also to ingenuity, but the details of those have to wait until the patch notes. So that's the end of the main news part of the video. I did want to end with one little thing to mention that I'm getting reasonably close to a channel milestone. Now, the number 50,000 means a lot to a lot of people. To me, honestly, it's less exciting than 49,049, which is 7 times 7 times 7 times 11 times 13. Maybe that's just a maths nerd in me, but I should probably do something when I tick over 50,000 whenever that happens. So if you've got any suggestions for that, definitely mention them down below. And as is normally the case on YouTube these days, if you want to see my videos about 3 times as often in your feed, then subscribe. If you don't want to see them 3 times as often, then don't. It's entirely up to you. I'm going to leave it there. May your Varlobs have interesting results.